Brett, are you there?
I'm here, Casey.
Fantastic. Glad to have you back, I guess. Even though I could totally do this by myself and be probably like super famous, whatever. It's good to have you along for the ride. So, tonight we have a pretty fun episode for you. We are going to be talking about a more recent internet legend, okay? And I'm sure all of you have heard of this guy, the Slender Man. This is a conspiracy theory of sorts, a little bit of a urban folklore, urban legend, but it's recent, okay? So is there really anything scarier than the concept of the collective dark and nerdy consciousness of the internet, okay? Springing to life in the form of a shadowy urban legend and leading people to actually start murdering each other? Probably not. You probably heard of this one again, but the fascination factor kind of comes out of how little information, really like reliable or verifiable information there is to be had out there because, like I said, he's a recent thing. Brett, take it away.
Okay, well, we're going to do a brief origin story. Um, what do we know? The Slender Man, also spelled Slender Man one word, is a fictional supernatural character that originated as a creepy pasta internet meme created by something awful forum user Eric Knudsen, aka Victor Surge. In 2009, Victor posted the first phantasm inspired photoshopped images on the Something Awful forums. They were simple black and white photos of children playing, but in the background, something was off. There was a long figure in a black suit. In some, you could see tentacles. Well, that's interesting. Each was paired with a vague caption. We didn't want to go. We didn't want to kill them. But its persistent silence and outstretched arms horrified and comforted us all at the same time. 1983, photographer unknown, presumed dead. Uh,
Yeah, it's pretty creepy. I kind of love it.
yeah, they put a lot of thought into this like fake photo. These images sparked something of a then viral surge as the lore of the Slender Man took off. And of course, since this was a newly created fictional character, there weren't many rules or parameters involved. At this point, reality was whatever you posted on the internet.
Sounds like it still is.
That's a scary thought. So,
It is.
so physically, depictions do vary slightly, but he is pretty consistently portrayed as a thin, unnaturally tall humanoid with a featureless head and face, wearing a black suit. When I say depictions vary, what I mean is that these versions of this legend also give the Slender Man long, shadowy tentacles that come out of his back.
So you think it's scarier with or without the tentacles?
Oh, with the tentacles, that's complete H.P. Lovecraft.
Yeah, it is. It really is.
As more and more stories of the Slender Man emerged, they generally featured him stalking, abducting, or traumatizing people, particularly children. The Slender Man has become a pop culture icon, although he is not confined to a single narrative, but appears in many disparate works of fiction. And yes, these are typically composed online. So in 2009, this guy was all the rage. He enjoyed a reign of web notoriety for about 5 solid years. All told, not a bad internet career. He's
Not at all.
he started appearing in pop culture more frequently and even inspired the Minecraft monster Enderman. Like all who rise to fame, a rise must be followed by a fall from grace. Beginning in 2014, a moral panic occurred over the Slender Man after readers of his fiction were connected to several violent acts, particularly a near fatal stabbing of a 12-year-old girl in Waukesha, Wisconsin. The stabbing inspired the documentary Beware the Slender Man, which was released in 2016 and was a flop, a 9% on Rotten Tomatoes.
I've actually heard a lot of people. I when I wrote this outline, I was like, oh my god, 9% on Rotten Tomatoes. Surely that's a fucking flop, right? But there's actually really mixed reviews on this. Some people fucking love that documentary. Some people hated it. So I'm not even gonna like commit to
I
it being a flop. I haven't seen it.
I haven't seen it either, so I won't judge that yet. But I personally When people like
9%.
highly rate a movie or a video game or something like that, I'll play it and I don't really like it. And then there's been instances where I'll find a movie or a video game that has very low ratings and it's fucking awesome. I enjoy it. So it's a, it's subjective.
Roll the dice.
Exactly. So Slenderman started on the internet and not that long ago, but he sure didn't stay there. Most people who have heard of this guy not only know about him because of the crime we just mentioned. Two 12-year-old girls who lured a classmate into the woods and stabbed her 19 times. Miraculously, the victim survived, but the media coverage of the story made sure to headline the most sensational detail.
Which is that, oh my god, satanic Slenderman monsters. Which is funny because I don't know if this guy would have taken off if this like pretty horrific crime hadn't occurred, which is how most people have actually heard of this guy.
Well, I did hear about this before the news article, and
Hmm.
but once this crime did happen, then media clickbait occurs, and grab the Karen's attention.
Yeah. So I'm gonna give you the story briefly in a nutshell, and then Brett is gonna take you through step by step a little bit more detail. You would think it would be pretty simple to find detail, like I'm talking real detail about this crime, as notorious as it was. But it was actually not that easy because if you were just to even like Google, the Slender Man stabbing, what you're getting are a lot of more recent headlines, which we'll get to a little later. But it was kind of a little scavenger hunt for me to go through and try to find less shallow information on this guy. So I'm going to give you the story briefly in a nutshell, which is that May 31st of 2014 in Waukesha,
Waukesha.
somewhere in Wisconsin, in this town with a W, Wisconsin, United States, there were two 12-year-old girls, Anissa Wire and Morgan Geyser, who lured their friend named Peyton Leutner. I wish people would just have better names. Lutner, Leutner, into a forest, and they stabbed her 19 times in an attempt to become proxies of the fictional character Slenderman, who we just talked about. Lutner basically crawled to a road where she was found by a cyclist and recovered about 6 days in the hospital. But we're going to break that shit down. I just want to point out the most important part of this headline, which is 12 fucking years old.
Yeah.
All three of these girls were 12.
Well, and circling back to what you were saying about Googling this, I wonder if people use this tragedy to write fan fiction with the stabbing, or how it kind of took a life of its own.
Yeah. People will do that with anything. I mean, if people, I don't know this for sure, but I can only assume that there is fan fiction out there of every horrific serial killer alive. So surely
I mean,
there's got to be
I
something.
don't disagree that's poor taste. I'm just wondering if that actually exists. But
I hope not.
well, we'll dive into this a little more. The victim, Peyton, did an interview in 2019 with 2020, and more facts about how bizarre and horrific this incident really was started to come into the light. Peyton Lutner, at the time, she was 12 years old. Peyton befriends Morgan in the fourth grade. According to Peyton, she first approached Morgan because she was sitting alone. After that, the pair took up like all best friends. They hung out after school, had sleepovers, and joked like little girls do. Just normal shit. Morgan even gave Peyton a sweet nickname, Bella. She was my only friend for a long time, Morgan said to police in her taped interrogation. This information was a little bit more difficult to dig up, but we were able to establish that Morgan suffered from behavioral and mental health issues from a very young age. She was later formally diagnosed with schizophrenia and oppositional defiant disorder. And Casey will get more into that later. Peyton and Morgan's friendship takes a backseat when Anissa enters the picture in the sixth grade. Morgan and Anissa become friends 2 years later, and that's when Peyton said, per people, everything went downhill. Morgan and Anissa became obsessed with Slender Man, which scared Peyton, but she said she went along with it anyways. Morgan liked it and thought it was real, but I went along with it. I was supportive because I thought that's what she liked.
So you know how cringy, absolutely fucking cringy 12-year-olds are, and how they kind of latch obsessively onto pop culture stuff, maybe even like horror myths like this. So I can definitely see how this can suck kids in. It's pretty it seems pretty harmless on the surface, and maybe, parents might not see any harm in this kind of thing. 12-year-olds, right? They're kids.
Yeah, a 12-year-old Casey got sucked into Lord of the Rings at the time.
And you say that like you didn't, sir.
I didn't say that. The three
Okay, well, yeah.
moving on, the three friends have a sleepover the night before the stabbing. It was a Friday night, and she was so excited, Peyton's mother, Stacy Lutner, said. According to Peyton, the trio were celebrating Morgan's birthday with a slumber party, but their regular old night of roller skating, pizza, and playing with their American Girl dolls turned odd. Peyton said that looking back, the sleepover was a little different from all their others, as Morgan didn't want to stay up all night, and the next morning they went to the park. I was told if I didn't do something, my family would be in danger, Anissa explained in her taped interrogation. According to the then 12-year-old, she feared that if she didn't honor Slenderman's request to kill Peyton, he would murder her family. The attacks first start in the park bathroom. Anissa tried to knock Bella out, which was Peyton. Bella got all mad and stuff, and I was pacing in circles, Morgan told police. According to a news report, Peyton stayed with the girls even though they just tried to fight her. Anissa and Morgan then led Peyton into the woods where they finished their attack. Now,
So I guess like they like smashed her head into the wall of this bathroom or something like that, and she still stayed and hung out with them.
I mean, well, what I want to know is where they got the instructions from Slenderman. Was that like the schizophrenia that was kicking in? Like,
Um, Again, we'll get a little bit deeper into this later. There's always the question of whether they really did have any mental health issues going on or not. In every insanity defense, there's that question. Is this real? Is this legit? Or is this a defense earning their money?
or do you think it was like psychologists trying to protect a child?
I think it's a little bit of all of that, as it usually is. Again, I really am interested in the psychology behind this, so that's why I wanted to take some time and dig into that later, because it's a little harder to wrap your mind around why someone would do this, but why specifically kids would do this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'll let you go ahead and finish this up.
Well, Morgan stabs Peyton 19 times. 19 times on May 31st, 2014. Reports vary on the exact details, mostly because Morgan and Anissa offer differing stories. During their interrogations, both point the finger at the other about whose idea the attack initially was. But what is factual is that Morgan stabbed Peyton repeatedly with a kitchen knife while Nissa stood and watched nearby. I have wanted to hurt people before, but they're not nice to me, so they deserve it, Morgan said to a detective.
So one of the conflicting stories here is that Morgan, after stabbing Peyton multiple times, tried to hand the knife to Anissa and get her to also stab Peyton, which I don't know. Again, it's really hard because this is two, not even teenage girls, 12-year-old girls giving extremely different statements about what happened, and both of them, they're talking to authority figures. They're probably
Mm-hmm.
doing their very best to stay out of trouble. So who knows? It makes sense in the context of this story if they really do think at this point that they are trying to become proxies for Slenderman, that they would both have to partake in the stabbing, but who knows?
Well, and also the one girl stood by, even watching this happen 19 times. Like, I don't see
Right.
anything about
The
stepping in to stop it, or that's still
No.
compliant with it.
The best version of her defense is that she stood by. The worst is that she was also supposed to partake in the stabbing, but chickened out maybe, or wisely chose not to, but still didn't make very good decisions this day.
Exactly. Peyton was stabbed on her chest and abdomen, and arm and leg. Brian Huxdorf, a doctor at the Waukesha Memorial Hospital, said to Muir on 2020, 5 wounds on her arm, 7 on her leg, and the rest scattered throughout her torso. Peyton was in intensive care for weeks and came through with 25 resulting scars. Biker happens upon a blood soaked Peyton and calls 911. Greg Steinberg was riding his bike that Saturday morning, and according to reports, he took a route through the brush that was chained off and then happened to ride by Peyton. So this guy's a rebel. He's going down the way he shouldn't
Mm-hmm.
go.
Good for him.
Who was lying in a grassy area after crawling out of the thicker woods where she was stabbed. She stopped him, asking, "Can you help me? Please, I've been stabbed multiple times." Steinberg immediately called 911 and offered her some water. On the call, he can be heard comforting Peyton, saying, "Honey, he's coming. They'll be here any minute." Soon after, an ambulance arrived on the scene. Uh, I just have to say, with 19 stab wounds, like I know that you're in law enforcement, I've military, I've seen my share of blood. Like one thing that Hollywood and even Gorefest movies don't really get right is the amount of blood loss the human body can go through and the sheer amount
Right.
of blood. And just me just picturing this and reading through this outline, 19 stab wounds, even for a kid or adult. I mean, there's a lot of blood on this scene.
Um, I mean, and the human body can lose a surprising amount of blood. But you're right. The amount of blood would be obscene. It's hard to imagine, right? Especially that what's the word? That young of a kid, because I know that the average human body has like, I don't know, is it 2 liters of blood, something like
That
that?
sounds
But
right.
I don't know for a kid. It's going to depend on your weight and your size and shit like that. But who knows how many or how deep these wounds were? Hopefully, they were not that deep. It sounds like maybe they were not, thankfully, because again, this is a child inflicting the wounds
Yeah, I'm not.
who, doesn't have a lot of strength. And then obviously, at that age, you might not have also the, what's the word I'm looking for? The oomph to really, really commit to each of these stabs. And then also stabbing somebody is much harder than movies make it look like. It's not like sliding a knife into butter.
No,
Okay. It's
you're t-
a lot of
you're
work.
talking about the follow through, like like a serial killer or something, like an adult attacking a child or someone weaker. There's a lot more damage inflicted.
Yeah.
Stacy and Joe Lutner get the news about their daughter. That Saturday morning, a uniformed police officer approached the Lutner property. According to Stacy, her first thought was, "Something has happened to somebody that I love." Both parents said that they were blindsided. Minutes later, they rushed to the hospital. And as a dad reading that, like I don't know how I'd respond, like getting that kind of news.
I can't. I mean, I'm not even a dad or a mom or anything but an aunt, but I would be freaking out, man. I'd freak
Oh,
out.
of course. Morgan and Anissa run away, but the cops find them shortly after. I'm not sure where they thought they were going or going to get to, but according to reports, the two girls tore off through the woods on a quest to find Slenderman now that their deed was done. Rolling Stone explains that the mansion where Slenderman mythically dwells is located somewhere within the Wisconsin's Nicollet National Forest. "We tried to find Slenderman," Megan confirmed to an investigator.
Well, there's a lot to work through there. Brett, can you turn off the screen share real quick because it's flashing? We were going to try to have some cool images of Slenderman up for you guys, but I don't know that it's working. We'll find out when we review. But there's a lot to unpack here. Okay, so we've got, obviously, did we mention two 12-year-old girls attempting to murder another 12-year-old girl? Like, god dang. Okay. Um, Now, if you were to hear this story before the verdict, before the court proceedings, your first impression would be what?
Like first take, like hearing this,
Yeah.
what the actual fuck?
Would you believe that they would you wonder like is this true? Would you wonder like are they
It's not if I believe it's true. These two girls that committed the assault on their friend believed it was true, and they stuck by it to the end.
No, I mean like I think it would be hard for me to even believe that two 12-year-olds did this in the first place, is what I
Oh, I
mean.
see what you're saying.
Like that it happened at all. Like obviously it did happen. It's wild. Um and I think that I would immediately go what's wrong with these kids? Like what's wrong with them mentally, right?
Well, and that goes back to parental involvement. What they were allowed to do or not do. And I mean,
Right.
it says something about society that we're going to be more accepting. If we were reading this, it was like 15-year-olds attacking each other. Like for some
I would
that would,
yeah, believe that.
somehow that makes more sense in the brain than 12-year-olds doing this.
I think I've said this before, but it bears repeating that as a cop, right? And the years that I've been doing this, my least favorite group of people to deal with by far are teenagers. And there is something, I believe, mentally wrong with teenagers, okay? And I say that as a former teenager myself, believe it or not. But it's like they are capable of all of the destruction that an adult is capable of, but they have no conscience, it seems like. Like, you can sit, I personally am very good at guilt tripping people, especially on the job. So, like a grown ass adult, I can sit there and, like, guilt the fuck out of that, like, grown man. But when it comes to a teenager, there's absolutely no getting through to them. For them, not all of them, most of them. 99% of the teenagers I've ever dealt with, it's like they have no soul, nothing behind the eyes, nothing happening. Their consciousness has not yet fully developed. They have no, or conscience, I guess, is like not there. So they have no, the same way that an adult might stab somebody and immediately like feel remorse. Teenagers do not.
Wh-
Okay? They don't.
Why do you think they might be that much more desensitized in your experiences?
Oh my god. I don't know, maybe I've thought about this a lot because it's something I wonder about a lot because it's so weird where you can deal with a grown man who's sobbing and crying because maybe he did something bad and immediately felt that normal human emotion of regret. Teenagers could be like talking about how they want a Subway sandwich, after they just stab somebody. Um, they just don't, like, I remember responding to a wreck one time where the kid had, like, I probably shouldn't tell these stories, but I gotta follow through now. I committed already. Shit. The kid had hit somebody, a pedestrian, and the pedestrian was deceased. The teenager, who was, I want to say was 16 or 17, driving like a brand newish car, um, he was just pissed off, and he was like, "If my dad finds out that you didn't have a lawyer when you talked to me, blah blah blah." That's all he cared about. He didn't. There was literally a body like laying 10 feet away from us. Okay, that he had just hit because he was driving like extremely fast in a residential area. Um, he didn't care at all. He had zero concern, zero, like, and he kept looking over at the body because the ambulance drivers were there and everything. But he didn't, like, he was just pissy. He was like, "You need to give me my phone. I want to smoke. I need to call my dad. I need to call a lawyer. Blah blah blah. This is fucked up." Like, he was so indignant.
This would have been one of those like golf clubs. My dad will see your dad. Like,
He didn't seem that wealthy, but yeah, he was driving a new car, but like he was pretty like he had that little wannabe gangster thing going on, but it was just wild. I just remember like being like kind of floored by the fact that he was completely unbothered that somebody had just lost their life. Like an adult, in that situation might be crying, might be upset, might be stressed and shaking. This kid was just pissed off because he was going to sue us because we talked to him without a lawyer. And I'm like, bro, like that's maybe like the total least of your moral concerns right now. But it's just I've never figured out what it is about teenagers except that they're capable of horrific things because they now have the body essentially of an adult and their conscience is just still in the closet. It's in hibernation or something. So that has always bothered me about teenagers. I don't know what it is. Weird shit.
yeah,
So good luck. Your kids are going to be teens
oh
eventually.
yeah, very close.
And again, I know we went a little off track there, but there's something in kids, man, and maybe it started young in these guys, but
Well,
the psychology is hard to get into here, but we
I
will.
need to go back. The one that we read earlier that was having the schizophrenia or the other medical issues when they're younger,
Mm-hmm.
was that the victim or one of the attackers? I'm assuming the
That was
attackers.
one of the attackers. That was Morgan. We are going to get a little deeper into her mental health issues and things like that later on because that's what fascinates me here. But it's very, very rare for kids to even start showing early stage or early onset schizophrenia that young. So it seems a little bit of a stretch if they tried to bring that in.
And I asked these questions because Casey, you did the outline for this week, and so
Mm-hmm.
I knew a little bit about this beforehand from what I knew from pop culture and news headlines, and so going through this, how you compiled it, like I'm learning stuff that I didn't know before. So that's
Okay, you're off the
and this
cuff.
is more, yeah. So I'm learning along with some of our listeners that don't know about this. So I
Mm-hmm.
just want to do that in full disclosure.
Okay, and I'm gonna hit on the verdict here a little bit because this was a little bit of a controversial case, and that's how a lot of people again heard about this in the first place. Was the Wisconsin courts stirred up quite a bit of heated debate when they waived these two juveniles over into adult court, which means quite a few things. So, first of all, the sentences will be much harsher. I believe in Wisconsin, the maximum that a juvenile could be sentenced would be like 3 years. And they're like, that's definitely not enough for attempted murder. We want them tried as adults. This is a pretty heinous fucking crime. And the court said, yeah, you're actually right here. And that's another reason that we do have any information is because due to being tried as adults, the juveniles were no longer protected under the status of being a juvenile, and their names were released to the press, which normally would not have happened for 12-year-old kids for obvious
Well, and
reasons.
that would be include pictures as well, right? Like for news and
A lot of things, yes. So, again, there was a lot of talk at this time whether 12-year-old kids could be held responsible in this manner, but it doesn't matter because the court said yes, they can. So, in December 2017, Anissa, who was the girl who stood by, if you recall, she received the maximum 25 years in a mental health facility after pleading guilty to being an accomplice to second degree intentional homicide. In February of 2018, Morgan, she is the one who did the actual stabbing, she received 40 years in a mental hospital after pleading guilty to attempted first degree intentional homicide. So note that neither of these kids receive any actual jail time because the courts pretty much unanimously decided that they were insane, which was actually part of the plea agreement. So, in order for a plea agreement to go through, there has to be something mutually beneficial going on for both parties. So, obviously, the courts want their conviction. So, they wanted to go for a conviction such as intentional first degree homicide in, Morgan's case. They say, plead guilty to this, and we will allow you to plead guilt or, not guilty, quote unquote, by way of will find you not guilty by reason of, I believe it's mental disease was the name in Wisconsin, and will sentence you instead of jail time to a mental institution for X number of years. So you still have to plead guilty, but we're going to, it's a both guilty and not guilty kind of weird
yeah, I
situation
kind
here.
of get that. I mean, and they're not
Do
they're
ya?
not
Okay.
playing around with that. I mean, because I guess the other side of this, other than going to a mental health facility, would be what, just jail or prison? Like, is that the
Which,
alternative since they're tried as adults?
yeah, and that would be a really interesting situation because obviously, even if they are tried, sentenced, convicted as adults, they would still have to be in a
Well,
juvenile holding facility for the first 8 or 6 years.
until they are an adult to be transferred to that. Because I mean,
Right,
Morgan. So let's say Morgan did not accept the plea, then it would be 6 years juvenile, and then the rest of the sentence in adult penitentiary.
right. Yeah, because I mean, these kids definitely would have been found guilty. I don't believe that I was able to put this in here because I did kind of slap this together pretty quickly. But apparently, these kids had been exchanging emails with each other for almost 6 months, I want to say, about this murder that they were going to commit on Slenderman's behalf. So they had been talking about this, obviously premeditating it pretty clearly for a very long time. So there was infinite evidence. There was notes, physical letters, there was emails, there was a bunch of drawings that one of them had did. They had poorly hidden and,
They're 12.
executed this
They're
plan. They're
12, and
12.
that's where the intentional homicide comes in. I mean, and then
Correct.
how cringe would it be? I doubt any of us, you, me, our listeners would want any of their, AOL instant messaging from when you're 12 years old to be read for months or presented in court.
I would disappear into the woods and change my name.
And as far as recent headlines, I mean, this was something that was just recently back in the news, right?
Right.
The second of two Wisconsin teenagers ordered to a mental institution in 2014 Slenderman stabbing case is seeking a conditional release. Morgan Geyser, who is now 20, filed a petition for release June 14th, 2022. So that just happened last
That
month,
just
yeah.
happened. And that's what kind of got me on the idea of doing an episode on this because for a while this topic was a little bit beat to death. There's not that much information. There's only one case on it, a bunch of documentaries and different like derivative works, but for the most part, this is like the main thing that Slender Man has become famous for and it's beat to death. But she's back in the news and this is Morgan, the one who did the stabbing. She's now 20, so she's been in this mental institution for 8 years, right?
Well, and before you get into the psychology, Casey, do you think someone like Morgan you might cover this later in the outline. Do you think this is somebody that could rehabilitate being in a facility for 8 years from something
That
like
is a
that?
that's a question that I had as well because it's not like just being in prison or something for 8 years. From the age of 12, so during her formative years, well, I guess she wasn't convicted until she was like 14. So, but from the age of 12 to now 20 years old, she has not been out in society. So, how difficult would it be to like reassimilate for someone who spent their growing up years, their teenage years, behind locked
So did
doors?
you actually, help somebody or set them back with this?
Right. Who knows? And obviously, there's no argument that these kids, something needed to happen as a
I,
punishment or,
I,
a
and
consequence.
me as a father and parent, I mean, I'm looking at the parents too. I mean, why are the parents? I'm not saying they need to read their kids every message or anything like that, but they should be somewhat involved or knowing that, if there's going on for months talking about possible homicide or joking about it, so like there should have been red flags, I would think.
Apparently, they kept it pretty secret from classmates, teachers, and parents. But yeah, I
And that
mean,
makes it even more
I
sinister. I mean,
I hesitate to blame the parents completely in cases like this because yes, I think parents in general need to be more responsible because again, as a cop, I see a lot of irresponsible parents. But as a connoisseur of true crime and someone who spends a stupid amount of time like watching documentaries and things, it's kind of heartbreaking to see so many instances where despite a parent's like heartbreaking best efforts and doing everything correctly, sometimes these kids are just rotten and they grow up and do horrible things, maybe to their own parents or family members or other members of society. So I've learned to rein in that judgment a tiny bit here on situations like this instead of just kind of wholesale saying this was bad parenting.
oh yeah, no, I'm not saying it's bad parenting. I don't even know the parents or anything, but I'm,
Right.
I'm just saying in general, you chose to procreate. You are gonna, good or bad, be responsible for your children to a certain age or certain point,
Yes.
and
I agree with
and the
that.
parents unfortunately have to live. I mean, I can't imagine having to live through the media thing, the courts, the backlash of the community, like the victims' parents. Like that would just be a nightmare to go through.
Hmm. And I think part of the reason cases like this are so fascinating is because they are usually, pretty heinous and horrific things that occur or, crimes that are perpetrated. And it leaves us all asking that question that we as normal people, normal, always have, which is why? Why would they do this? And so I wanted to get into that a little more because, again, this has been beat to death so many times. A lot of people know this inside and out, but I want to like dive into the psychology as a little bit of a breather from that structure and talk a little bit about each person and kind of the defenses they tried to come up with. So Anissa was the one, we'll start with her, who stood by and watched the stabbing or, refused to participate depending on what story you believe.
No, I do have
Good.
a question on that. Now, did she not have blood on her, or is there something that made them think that she really did stand by, like, or is that just
It's
hearsay? That because
it's not even enough that she just stood by because obviously she was convicted.
accomplice,
It was
but
just
but
yeah.
but I'm just going through. Obviously, I don't have the police report here, or anything like that. But
Hmm.
did she have cuts on her from like the victim like trying to get away, or I mean,
That I do not know. I do not
that's
have that
just
information.
stuff I'm curious about.
I'm also curious, but I believe that Morgan did have like a significant amount of blood on her when she was found, or they recovered her clothes. I wish my memory was better because there was something along that line. But Anissa specifically was somehow, by whatever evidence or whatever plea agreement, was found to be the less guilty and received the lesser sentence. In 2017 was when she finally pled guilty to being a party to attempted second degree intentional homicide. Again, she was sentenced to 25 years at the Winnebago Mental Health Institute. And then in March of 21, so this was just last year, she asked the court to release her from the institution after being there for 3 years. And that was granted because she, I believe, from what I've read, had no prior mental health issues, no nothing, pretty squeaky clean mental health record, and then no incidents while she was institutionalized. So she was released conditionally, of course. She's been out and among us since, I don't know what month she actually came out, but in March 2021 is when it was, stated. She'll remain on some sort of court supervision until she's 37 years old. And all I was able to find on that was basically she has to live with her father, so pretty common like probation type situation, and wear a GPS monitoring device. I did find a little article from kind of mid trial where they hired a psychologist, or she was appointed by the judge, Melissa Westendorf, and she was hired to evaluate Anissa specifically after the insanity plea. So Westendorf testified at Wire's mental capacity trial, which, for those of you who don't know, is making sure that this person is fit to stand trial, right? Um, that she believes Wire suffered from a shared delusional disorder that left her unable to conform her conduct to the law when she and Geyser tried to kill the friend Peyton in 2014. So Westendorf acknowledges under cross examination that the condition is rare among two children who are friends. She said most cases involve spouses, a parent and child, or siblings. And I'm talking about the shared delusional disorder. It's a rare condition, so the fact they're trying to bring it in kind of shows they might be grasping a tiny bit.
Mm-hmm.
Wire's attorney, Joseph Smith Jr., he asked why Wire, who was a good student, did not recognize that the belief in this Slenderman guy and his powers to kill them or their families was a delusion. Like, how, you're a smart kid. How do you not recognize this is not a thing? First of all, she's 12 years old at the time, Westendorf says, and she adds that Wire was influenced by a website, which we talked about, focused on imaginary killers and boogeymen. So if adults have trouble distinguishing fake news, 12-year-olds will because their brains can't yet discern or analyze quite as well.
Which you mentioned earlier about teenagers.
Right. Man, God, don't get me started on the teenager thing. I'm sure that'll come back up at some point because you just it's it's shocking the shit that teenagers will do. And in that it's not the shit they do. It's their attitudes afterwards or their lack of fucking anything. There's like no empathy, no remorse. Literally lights are on, not a goddamn soul at home. Literally no soul.
Lights on, no one's home.
God. But it's worse. It's I imagine it's how people feel when they're interviewing like a serial killer, like that lack of consciousness happening, but eventually I guess they grow out of that. I don't know. Grow a conscience, okay? Any thoughts on that?
Um, like you said, reaching for straws there. I mean, obviously she bought in. I don't know how great of a recruiter this Morgan was. I mean, she could be like one of those, very charming, get you on board, sell sand at the beach kind of person.
Right.
So, and then Anissa could have been very gullible. It could have been a clash of, one alpha personality, a beta personality. I mean, there's a lot of things going on there. And then being,
I would bet I would bet you money that when I was 12 years old, I could have convinced you to stab someone with me.
no, I don't think so.
I would put money on it, sir. He says now years later. Greyhounds, man. Okay, so we're gonna go on to Morgan Geyser, who is the most interesting part of this to me because as most people who watch a lot of true crime and are really into that shit know, stabbing is a very personal crime anyways, okay? Some psychologists have likened it to like sexual penetration, okay? It's an up close and personal, it's a violation of the human body, and it requires you to quite literally get your hands dirty. So stabbing is already kind of has some psychological red flags going on. And then 19 times, okay? So that, in, again, the people should know this, it's what's considered overkill. You see that a lot in crimes that are committed between spouses, right? A jealous or angry, vengeful husband or wife. If you are going to take the time to stab somebody for a purpose, say, I want them dead, that's one thing. You could stab them one or two times and the job would be done. Stabbing them 19 times is an indicator that this is a very deeply personal thing to you and you have a great deal of rage or negative feeling towards that person and you're taking it out on them by stabbing them this many times, right? So that was an interesting thing to me, the 19 stab wounds. Again, it's different if, both of them had engaged in the stabbing. And it's also possible that during a crime like this. You might stab somebody one time and immediately feel like this was a bad idea. I should not do this
But to
anymore. The
continue,
fact to continue 18 more
and
times.
it, like you said, it shows a personal vendetta or jealousy or
Hmm.
some sort of anger or deep rooted, you know.
Something is going on that deeply involves emotions. Obviously, this is not a logical decision, anyways, that was made by these two, but the fact that 19 times the knife went in and out, that's pretty important information, right? And that makes it very tough to mount a good defense, I believe, because each one of those is a choice. You pull the knife out, you put it back in. That's a choice every single time. It's not like you stabbed her one time and then, oh my God, what am I doing? I shouldn't do this. Second time, third time, 15th time. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So that's why I want to get a little bit more into Morgan, who is interesting. And I found some, again, this was tough to dig up, which is why I love it. It wasn't immediately available, but I was able to find some older articles where different psychologists did interview Morgan, and specifically, they tried to bring in her father, whose name was Matthew Geyser. So, Deborah Collins, she's a forensic psychologist. She was hired as part of Morgan's defense team during the trial, and she interviewed, again, both Morgan and her father pretty extensively. As part of the defense strategy, Collins honed in on the fact that Morgan's father, Matthew, had been diagnosed, with schizophrenia at a young age, and he was hospitalized multiple times. I want to say 4 times during his early teen years, like the ages 13 to 15.
And that goes with certain mental disorders being genetic or can be passed down.
That's exactly the point she's trying to make
Exactly.
here. So, after getting married and having kids, Matthew had continued to struggle pretty hard with his mental health. He reported to his wife that he was still having hallucinations and hearing voices, things like that. He actually made several suicide attempts while he was with his wife and was hospitalized twice. And all this information, again, this Deborah Collins psychologist is trying to say this is relevant because schizophrenia has strong genetic links, right? So, one of the quotes by Collins, she states that Morgan continues to believe in fantasy characters and opposes medication for her condition because she fears it would lead to the loss of her friends. And by friends, it's in quotes, right? So Geyser had reported to Collins that she interacted with various Harry Potter characters and a girl named Maggie. So we're talking about essentially imaginary friends here.
Oh, so Maggie's imaginary or a tulpa,
Yes.
a
Yeah, and I wanted to make sure.
manifestation.
Yeah, when they say a girl named Maggie, there is no girl named Maggie. This is somebody that she had either legitimately been interacting with as, you know, a hallucination, or she's a normal 12-year-old with an imaginary friend. I'm not trying to say that that kids who have imaginary friends are hallucinating.
But isn't there a certain age? Like I don't know that many, even 8, 9 year olds and up that have the imaginary friends thing. That seems like a more like 4 year old to 7 year old kind of thing. I mean,
Correct. Correct. But then you imagine, say you're 4 and 5 year old, Morgan, and your parents are always telling you, ha, remember that imaginary friend Maggie you used to have? And they never really let you forget about it. And then suddenly you end up stabbing somebody, and your psychologist sits down with you and starts coaxing you. Have you ever had an imaginary friend? Who are you going to remember? Who are you going to start talking about? Is Maggie. Doesn't necessarily mean she's still seeing this friend. It means that at some point she either made this person up or came up with, I used to know this, when I was a kid. It doesn't, you know what I mean? Like, it's easy to coax kids to kind of say what you want them to say, which is why I'm
so
doubtful of this whole
okay.
thing.
So I see what you're saying. So the timeline isn't then; it could have been at some other point earlier.
Now, this psychologist is trying to make it sound like it's right now. This psychologist is also being paid by Morgan's
I was
defense
about to
team
say
to say
that. I
things
was about
like
to say
this.
that she's on the defense.
Hmm. And I say this as somebody who's extremely a little fed up with the whole court system and the circus that they make it. Because there's a lot of just like smoke and mirrors going on, and we all know it's happening. We all still go through these hoops. It gets a little exhausting, and shit like that is pretty commonly pooled because it can be, because it's great in court for someone to show up and say these things. It doesn't mean it's true or false, it means it sounds good, and that's convenient. So, going back to the schizophrenia issue, okay? Research shows that having a family history of schizophrenia, it does increase a person's risk of developing the disease as much as tenfold. So, the fact that her father was schizophrenic means that she has about 10 times, or, approximately there, the risk of developing it herself. So the Waukesha stabbing, as described in the criminal complaint, it fits the template of a psychotic attack, especially the premeditation and elements of fantasy, according to this guy named C. Raymond Lake, who's a psychiatrist and a professor at the University of Kansas School of Medicine, which is a place that I have been many times. So in one statement, I guess Geyser told police that she had never met Slenderman, but she believed that he was watching her and he could read her mind. Okay? Doesn't sound like a very mentally stable thing to say. So Geyser and Wire, they told police, they eventually admitted they'd been planning to kill Peyton for months before they actually carried out the attack, right? So after they were apprehended, they did say they were trying to become proxies for Slenderman, and that they were on their way to live with him in a mansion in the Nicollet National Forest, right? So these are all like little red flag statements they're making.
So they want to be like Slenderman's disciples.
I guess so. Again, I can only imagine the limits to 12-year-old
Well,
logic.
and who knows which online story that they read and believed? Because, like you said, there were so many,
Right.
variations or whatever the internet wanted to make. It's one open ended.
And that's important to note too, because it's not like they're just suddenly imagining these things about this creature in the picture. Like, this guy had really developed his own cult-like following online, and by following I mean people really invested because they could write their own lore on this guy. They could write their own
Fan,
stories. They could make up their own,
fan fiction.
essentially fan fiction of a photoshopped photo. A little strange, but so Lake goes on to say that genetics are just as important, if not more so, than environment in trying to determine what might motivate a 12-year-old to violence, because that's what we're all trying to figure out. So one of his comments was that, if Matthew Geyser had delusions of the macabre and that he maybe could have exposed his daughter to them, she could have been very likely to share them. Again, this is the same guy who's been having hallucinations, hearing voices, and making legitimate suicide attempts. So it's potential that Morgan was exposed to that kind of thing, and maybe, if daddy believes it, it's true kind of thing. People,
And
this is kind of where, go ahead.
that kind of falls under when Wessendorf had that cross examination, and it was said most cases involve a parent and a child. That could have
Mm-hmm.
been like you said,
Shared
the shared
delusions.
delusion with the father being into the macabre, adult content that probably wasn't appropriate for a child that
I think
age.
when they say the macabre, they're referring to the hallucinations he was having,
Okay,
because when you have hallucinations, they're not fucking rainbows and sunshine, right?
I,
They're generally negative.
I picture somebody like looking at crime scene photos or like stuff
Oh
that's really
yeah.
graphic or like picking up roadkill on the side of the road, like just stuff like that.
Right. Definitely that could they never really mention anything like that, but I believe in this case he's talking about, when he says the macabre, he's talking about the hallucinations dad was having, especially if he couldn't distinguish them from reality and he was interacting with them like schizophrenic people often do, in my experience. She's observing and kind of absorbing all of this that's going on with dad, right? So here's the kind of the kicker, which is that people aren't typically diagnosed with mental illnesses that cause psychotic thinking until they're in their late teens or early 20s. But in rare cases, children 12 years old and younger can be psychotic. Again, we're talking rare.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, that's like every horror
That
movie
like that is
ever.
absolutely terrifying.
The little kid who's suddenly like, he's watching you. He doesn't like you here. Creepy eye
Wake up
contact.
with a kid at the edge of your bed with a knife, like no.
So they're trying to establish if potentially there's some psychotic behavior going on, and they're really latching on to the beliefs in the Slender Man and stuff like that, which to me sounds like normal 12-year-old obsession. This is the kind of shit you get into when you're 12. But they can't really establish the psychotic thing, especially because 90% of all murders, approximately, are committed by people who are not psychotic. The psychosis thing is pretty rare, like for murderers. Their motivations are more logical, based on money, sex, jealousy, revenge, stuff like
Well,
that.
those last two, jealousy and revenge, with the 19
Mm-hmm.
times.
Yeah, and usually happen in the heat of an argument and are the result of drug or alcohol or other addictions. The killer flees the scene, sometimes gets away, but it's rarely actual psychotic diagnoses that drive most murders. So with psychotic killers, the acts are well planned, often over a long period with a purpose. They often commit the crime during the day. And in every one of those cases, the killer was caught. So if you look at those things, though, that last sentence, the acts are well planned. 6 months of planning, perchance, often over a long period, right? With a purpose, okay, to please Slenderman. The acts are often committed during the day. It's worth noting that this stabbing occurred in broad daylight in a public park.
Well, and then but it was done at the restrooms, the park is, still parks aren't as populated as other places in town or anything, so it's still semi
True.
secluded. Because
Semi, but you know what I mean. This was not like a. It happened during the day, which is already weird enough because I'll be honest with you, like, stuff like this generally doesn't happen during the day. Um, drug rips and stuff, sure, but like this is not a daytime crime, all right? It's not daytime
this
television.
isn't normal. Um,
This isn't your average soap opera.
Well, in response to concerned parents and parties, the Creepypasta Wiki published a statement emphasizing that everything in it is clearly made up. Something like this was bound to happen, considering the size of Creepypasta community. All it takes is one person to do something insane and radical in the name of someone or something. It says there's a line between fiction and reality, and it is up to you to realize where the line is. We are a literature site, not a crazy satanic cult.
All right, so what are your takeaways here?
Um, I
Thoughts?
think that's cool that they put that out there because yes, it is on the user or the reader or listener or whoever's digesting that media to separate reality from fiction. That's not them to be liable for that. I think,
Right, and which is
and
correct.
they never. I mean, they never could have been forced to come out with something like this, and I think that's big of them to come out and even put out a statement when they didn't have
I
to.
can only imagine the negative publicity they were receiving because like when everyone decided that like D&D was satanic and that like swept the world and oh my
Are
god, you're
are
worshiping
are you
Satan.
talking more like the in the '90s with the Satanic Panic that was going on?
Correct,
Yeah.
yeah, but there's a lot of negative shit said about D&D, which is definitely not not satanic, but it's the same thing with creepypasta. All of a sudden, I'm sure parents everywhere are just panicking, kicking their kids off, online forums and creepypasta because of
Well,
this.
and then here's the other thing is that even negative publicity is publicity, and that makes it even more taboo, and people want to
Hmm.
go more the rebel route, and that can even give them more followers.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, this was a lot of notoriety for this, but we don't really have any answers as far as why these kids did it because you're not going to accept to please some online monster, even if the 12-year-olds were thinking that at the time. There's a lot of 12-year-olds believed in this guy and did not
Well,
go murder their
and I think
friends.
one thing that we kind of breezed over earlier is that it said like the woods where he was supposed to be residing was in
Hmm.
Wisconsin. And so I think because these kids lived in Wisconsin, that made it even more real and more grandeur to them, gave a more sense of realism to them in their mind.
I don't know for sure that the lore or the story they read said that it was in Wisconsin, but it probably said in the woods, mansion in the woods. And kids being kids are going to
Well,
assume the only woods that exist are these woods we're in right
well,
now.
I'm just going. The reason I say is because it actually named the woods of where they were, like near where they were at. So that was pretty
Yeah, but I
specific.
don't think I don't think that the website said that. I think that it was referring to these are the woods that the kids think in this particular park.
Reg-
But I don't know.
Regardless, that's tragic. I mean, and then also the victim, being 12 years old, being stabbed, the amount of trauma and probably you
Hmm.
know amount of mental anguish to go through with that,
Oh yeah.
and then probably having probably I would assume body dysmorphia because your body's still developing and changing, and you have all these scars, going to womanhood. Like that's a lot.
And in 2019, like I mentioned briefly, or the outline mentioned, she did a kind of tell all interview where she shared her personal kind of journey and experience. I believe it was with somebody on 2020. I don't remember who, but I'm not going to try to guess because I'll probably be wrong. But there is an interview out there you can watch where she talks about like the things you're mentioning, the backlash and kind of the recovery process for her. Um, there's a lot going on, and I can only imagine the level of like trust issues that would build in somebody at that age. These are your closest friends. You know, you've already kind of become a little bit of a third wheel to them when they became obsessed with things on the internet that you didn't quite like or get, and then they try to murder you. It's going to be
She,
really hard to have healthy friendships after
she's
that.
trying to have a pizza party and play with her American Girl doll. Like,
Well, it was actually whose birthday? It was Morgan's birthday, I want to say. But anyways, um, we're trying not to go too long on this one. This is just one of those little legends on the internet that everyone has kind of heard about, like a little, earworm, but doesn't maybe know the details of. Now, I will say that since this all happened, the Slenderman hysteria has definitely died off, and he's considered quote unquote burned out according to like Reddit users and shit. Like they just are not into him anymore. He's old news. We don't really, deal with this guy anymore. He's kind of a fade into the background, just like his photos, which we will be posting on the socials.
yeah.
And we'll post a little more information. I might even dig up that link, which was
Um,
to the interview.
I think also, Casey, it would be cool to have pictures of what pictures are available of the girls too. That would
Yes.
be pretty
Yeah, I can
helpful.
do that. Absolutely. So that's how we're going to wrap it up. Thank you for sticking with us through that episode. We're going to end with a Florida them. And I'm going to take this opportunity to, I guess, poke fun at my own profession a little bit. This one's about a cop. Oh, God. You can only imagine. Florida man, police officer, arrested for DUI while at work and driving his patrol car. And that pretty much sums up the fucking article. But I almost want to attempt to pronounce the name of this department. According to the the Apopka Police Department,
Excuse
the
me.
Eustis Police
You mean
Department,
the Desk Pop Police Department?
Apopka, common spelling,
Oh, Desk Pop. Okay.
Apopka, who was in his marked agency vehicle or conducted a traffic stop on the officer who was in his marked agency vehicle and in uniform for suspicion of DUI. So the officer was identified as a 5-year vet of the department, 25-year-old Oscar Mayorga, and he was arrested for DUI on
So,
July 4th around 6
so
p.m.
what's the difference between suspension of DUI? So they haven't proved it yet, or they didn't do a blood draw, or like it.
Some states will say on suspicion of DUI, but like it's a DUI. Like we're not gonna
It's lawyer talk.
if we don't have probable cause. Yeah, it's lawyer talk. So they got, I guess, a complaint that an Apopka police cruiser was driving recklessly on this highway, and when he was pulled over, the responding officer stated that he noticed that this police officer, Oscar, had an open beer in his cup holder.
So let me get this right. A police vehicle pulls over a police vehicle.
Jesus Christ. Yeah. So it was one department pulling over another department's
Now, how
officer.
would you react that you're in your county vehicle and you're getting pulled over by another vehicle? Like, let's say you're not doing anything wrong, but you have another law enforcement vehicle popping up behind you and lights go off.
I think if I did pull over, I'd have to be drunk. Otherwise, I would just like flip them off and not pull. I'm not gonna pull over. Like if I'm in my uniform in my car and another cop gets behind me, I'm like, oh shit, where are we going? Like we got a hot call to go to. You know what I mean? I'm never in my life going to pull over
Um,
for that car.
Oscar said, "Fuck it," and he.
Right. So I guess he made some claims about, oh, I have seizures. I just took a bunch of Benadryl, blah blah blah. So this department's particular policy was you cannot consume alcohol within 6 hours of responding to your shift. At my department, it's 8 hours. Again, no one's really like, sitting there with a stopwatch, but at the same time, they love to randomly drug test. Specifically me. It's supposed to be random and it's supposed to be everyone. But I swear to God, I have been randomly drug tested more times than anyone I know. And every single time that I pop clean, they're like, really? You're not on drugs? They're shocked.
My first job at Winco as an order selector, like they would like be all sneaky and come up in the electric golf cart behind me while I'm picking my orders, and I get pulled for your analysis, and I'd always pass, and it was just I kept getting like targeted, and I kept passing, and they just seemed very surprised.
The last thing I want to add on this, because I just saw this part, a breath test came back with a blood alcohol level of 0.391. Okay, so for those of you who aren't familiar with the numbers, 0.08 is the legal limit for an adult. Okay? Um, 0.391, if I were to pull someone over and they were to blow a 39, I would have to take them to the hospital
I was
immediately.
about to say, like, how's Oscar alive?
How is he driving? I mean, I don't know. That's
Why is he
wild.
not
That's like
passed
blood
out?
poisoning. For some people, that's how they operate. They can, seem, you can tell they're intoxicated, but they're so used to operating at a high level of intoxication that that their level surprises you, right? But this is like a career drunk. So if somebody were to not drink often and then drink to this level, they would probably have alcohol poisoning. Like, this is fucking high. That's an insane number. Like, my buddy will text me and be like, hey, I just got a, 0.21. That's pretty high, right? That's ridiculously drunk. 0.39, almost zero point 0.4. That is, I want to say 5 times the legal limit. And that's straight to the hospital with that guy. So, wow, Oscar. Wow.
Wow, a great state of Florida.
I love Florida. That's our Florida them. Thank you for that one. I definitely did have to pick on a cop for that one because I'll be making fun of my own profession a lot. We also do have a bonus episode up, which was probably the most fun I've ever had recording an episode so far with my good buddy, BB/Ryan, who is single, unlike Brett.
Nope.
I'm single too, but I'm mean, so don't talk to
I'm
me.
happily taken.
He is happily taken. God, look at your face. Only a special person would love that. So good for you, I guess, that someone settled for you. But we are going to wrap that up. We do have another guest coming up on our Tuesday recording who is a good friend of mine as well. She is not law enforcement or military, so she's going to have a different kind of civilian perspective. And I'll tease what we're going to be doing that episode on a little later on the socials. I'm not going to mention it yet. And then next week, we do have another episode coming up with Ryan, which I will also tease. So if those of you who watch that episode just can't get enough of Ryan and his hyena-like cackle, make sure you tune back in 2 episodes or 3 episodes from now. What the fuck ever. Tune back in. You should be watching and listening to them all
And
anyway.
and by watching, you mean that our video feed is uploaded on Spotify along with audio.
Unfortunately. It means I have to do my eyebrows every single time, but they look good. On fleek.
If you stuck with us this far, I'd appreciate if you go on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Anchor, wherever you're listening at. Give us a review. Hit the star, hit the bell, so you're not missing an episode. And also, a lot of times we put polls on our episodes, so you can give your feedback or things you'd like to hear, or reach us out on the socials or our email. Let us know of content you'd like us to cover, or if you're interested on guesting on the show, reach out to us. We love having discussions.
Brett's saying it in his radio host voice, but what he really means is that he gets a fucking boner every single time one person follows us, comments, or sends us a message. So for the love of God, give that man a hard morning and message him, okay? I also want to thank our listeners for sticking with us through the many technical issues as we have learned how to be podcasters and how to record, how to film, how to do all this shit, because listening back myself, some of these are horrific. They're so bad. Oh my God,
I
you're
I've
victims of a hate
I've
crime
only listened.
if you
I've
listen.
only listened to one of our episodes because I don't like my own voice, but we are getting better.
I don't like it either.
Thank you. We are getting through each episode. I feel like our production value is increasing.
You're absolutely correct. So thank you guys for sticking with us through all that. Please bear with us. We will get better, I promise. We will get funnier. I will get funnier. Brett will not. He's
Oh,
lost.
so lost.
We love you guys. Please give Brett, that good morning wood and fill up his inbox, okay? He loves that shit, I guess, for some reason.
You're so evil, Casey. I'll see you in next recording.
I know.
So
I'll see you next
I'll
week.
look out for the socials for those teasers, and I'll see you next episode.
Ramen.